Uh, so now are you a lockdown diagnosis? Because that was sort of how this all happened to me. And you said you were diagnosed last year. So
Well,
why don't we
yeah,
start there? Walk me through how you got diagnosed.
you're going to have to put up with me interrupting you constantly. I'm so sorry. But seeing as this is about ADHD, I feel like I'm going to be forgiven for that.
Oh, I know,
Um,
right? I'm used to it. We go all over the place. That's the beauty of a podcast with two women with ADHD. It's just
I'm just
like
trying desperately not to interrupt you constantly as I interrupt you. Essentially, I got diagnosed in 2019. So it was the end of, not last year, the year before, the very, very end of that year. So
oh, okay.
I thought it was last year, but obviously it was the tail end of 2019. So it was actually nothing to do with the pandemic. It was more to do with where I was mentally in my life. I experienced a huge amount of anxiety throughout my life, and it kind of came to a head really in 2019. I was away from my family for a while. Being in Australia, it's quite difficult sometimes being away from your support group, because I think when you feel different, you need people that love you no matter what around you. Um, and so I had to make a lot of new friends in Australia. Being from the UK, a lot of people I made friends with went back home at some point. And I made friends with lots of different people, but the majority of them kind of moved back to the UK. Now I have a really fantastic support group in Australia, but it wasn't really the case 2 years ago. I was kind of floating around. I was a bit lost. Came to Australia because I broke up with an ex. So I was just, floating around essentially trying to figure out what the hell I'm doing with my life. And then I just started getting panic attacks, really bad panic attacks. And I'd never really experienced that before on that level. I started to think I was going insane. I started thinking, oh my God, am I schizophrenic? Like all these intrusive thoughts. It was really intense, really, really awful. And then I went to a doctor. I had a therapist who I still see today, who is one of the most amazing women I've ever met before. And it was really down to her why I got diagnosed, because we were seeing each other for only a few weeks when she said, there's definitely a few things going on here. Um, one of which is pure O OCD, which is essentially mental rituals as opposed to physical. So
Okay.
it's kind of obsessive, intrusive thoughts, which actually go hand in hand with ADHD sometimes, anyway.
Yeah.
Um, and that's been calmed down now for a long time. My therapist has helped me with lots of techniques to not sort of spiral in terms of how my thinking's going. Um, so that's not too much of a concern anymore. But the ADHD was something that it actually didn't surprise me in the slightest. She just said, Holly, you've got quite severe ADHD because you speak so fast when you're anxious and your thinking's all over the place. I struggle with executive function. I can't listen for more than a few minutes, unless I'm really interested in something, all the classic signs. And so it was essentially my therapist that said I had it. And from that point on, I've just kind of researched it a lot and accepted it, been upset about it, been happy about it, all the different emotions. But my mum did say when I was a teenager, I think you might have ADHD. And I just didn't think anything of it. I was a teenager. I didn't care what that meant. I was just like, oh, okay, yeah, maybe. And then that was it. And then obviously as life continues on and there's a lot of challenges that are presented to you as you get older, my ADHD just got worse and worse because I was worried about so much more elements in my life, career, and a partner and financial things. Lots of different things kind of came to a head, and I just felt completely overwhelmed and bowled over essentially, and just needed a bit of guidance, I think.
Isn't it funny how it just like you can hear it several times in your life, and then one time it just lands and it's just like bam, like suddenly you're like, holy shit, I have ADHD. And like all of a sudden everything changed. Like I think about all the ways in which like my therapist suggested it to me for years. And I was sort of like, oh, fascinating, interesting. And I even took like self-tests online and was like, oh yeah, look, it's perfect. I cross every, every one of these things I have. But I still didn't know what to do with that information. And then at some point during the pandemic, when it was, I think I sort of hit some sort of perfect storm of difficulties and struggles in executive function, that I was like, maybe I will look into this. And maybe it's then that it's like, once you start to actually look into it, then it's like, oh my God, everything makes sense finally. Like, but it is amazing. Like I'm always fascinated when, so many of us seem to have that same experience where it was like, it wasn't like it just out of nowhere you were like, what is this ADHD you speak of? Like, it's this thing that kind of like you hear of over and over again. It's interesting that your mother actually recognized it in high
Oh yeah.
school. Um,
Oh God, I was hyperactive. I was really hyperactive, and just I think I've always been quite childlike in a lot of elements of my personality. I get very excited, and um, yeah, I think that I've always been like that. I've always felt mentally a little bit younger than all of my friends.
yeah.
Not my intelligence, but it's more just like I get excited like a kid. And I think in high school, my mum just thought, I used to like have these like physical sort of not shudders, but almost like if I was excited, I would kind of shake. It was just like too much energy running through my body almost, and I
Oh
would just
yeah.
kind of
I call that like my body buzz, like I get it
yeah.
after my interviews, I get body buzz because I'm so stimulated from the conversations that I have that afterwards I'm just like, yeah, what do I do? What do I do? And like I'll like have to go out and run around and stuff. Um yeah, but I know that's amazing.
I can just picture you running around in your garden.
like a robot.
And everyone's like, what is she doing? Oh, that's okay. She does that every few days.
It's her body buzz. Uh, did you know that like spontaneously picking up and moving from, I didn't move anywhere near as far as you did, but like when you said you broke up with an ex and moved to Australia, I was like, oh my God, I did the exact same thing 20 years ago. I broke up with an ex and just was like, I need to move. And I picked up and moved, and I moved from Canada to the US, and I met my now husband, and now I'm trapped here. But like it was, I had no idea that spontaneous travel was part of ADHD. And now I'm like, oh yeah, it makes sense. There's the impulsivity, there's the, like you said, like that sort of childlike wonder. But I think there's also something about like reinvention, like I think there is something about us that always wants to kind of start fresh and and leave all of our troubles back in the old place and have this whole, like I had this whole wonderful idea that I was just going to become like, start everything fresh, and I was going to become this perfect person. And I've noticed that throughout my life, that with diets and like all of these various ways in which we're like, today's the day that I'm going to start fresh and everything's going to be wonderful and I'm going to be that perfect person. So, where do you have a history of like spontaneously picking up and moving?
Oh, no. I've been traveling a lot in my life because living in the UK for most of my adult life, till I was 25. I'm 31 now, so I've been here for 6 years. But in the UK, obviously, I was there till I was 25, and it's so close to other countries in Europe that it'd be silly not to sort of just spontaneously travel. So I
Right.
wouldn't say I would just pick up and live in another country. The only reason I did that was because it was a really difficult breakup, and two of my very close friends already lived out here, so it was a very easy transition for me at the time. It was a no-brainer. Go to Australia where two of your best friends are, um, and that's what I did. But I lived in France and I lived in Spain as well when I was 22 and 23, when I was at university. So I think, yeah, part of that spontaneity is what I chose at university was to do languages. So I had to do a year abroad in my third year. So that was really interesting. Um, Also, really difficult, actually, more difficult than I imagined it would be, because I kind of isolated myself while I was living in France. I was supposed to be this teacher teaching children English. And as someone with ADHD and depression at the time, uh, I just thought I can't do this. Like planning lessons, what on
Mm.
earth am I supposed to be doing? And I was only young. I didn't have any support from sort of the school that I was working in, the French school. They didn't understand where I was coming from. I don't think they didn't, because French people tend to be quite sort of matter of fact, um, quite blunt. So if there's an issue, they just want you to say it. But I didn't know at the time what was going on with me. I just thought, God, you're so lazy, you're so stupid, you don't know how to be a teacher, you don't know how to do this or that. And I was missing home. All my university friends that I'd made, I was kind of ripped out of uni and then plonked in the middle of France. So that was really tough. But I would say overall, yeah, I love traveling. I love being spontaneous. My partner will tell you it was probably made him grey a lot earlier than he needs to be, because I am like just like Homer Simpson, and Marge is just like, what is happening? You're doing all these weird things all the time. That's kind of like me. I'm just making my partner grey before his time, because I'm always suggesting new things that we should be doing. And if we don't do them, I feel like I'm somehow missing out on something, because I've already had the thought now, so we have to do it, unfortunately.
It's like Dorian Gray. Meanwhile, you're getting younger.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, it's ridiculous. I tried so many different things as a kid, and yeah, I've always had these crazy ideas that I want to do. But I think Australia is probably the craziest, and it's obviously lasted 6 years now, so I must be doing something right.
So you went to school for languages? I'm just trying to keep like this is so ADHD. You
Oh,
went to
sorry.
university. This is like you went to university for languages. Now you're a copywriter. And somewhere along the way you became a craft beer expert and industry advocate for women. And like it's you know like I mean that's I love that. I mean you could my CV looks the exact same, which is like it is all over the place. But like and I love that. I love that about us. I love the fact that we do a million things too, but like it's also sort of it can be so dizzying when you're trying to be like, "Well, look, I need you to be like one thing." uh
That's never going
so
to happen.
I know, so but looking back, how was school? Like what are some things in your past where you look back and you're just like, okay, that obviously that was ADHD all along? Because you talked about high school a little bit. Was there anything like in your childhood that you look back now and you think that okay, that was clearly the ADHD?
Strangely enough, I didn't really struggle with schoolwork like a lot of people with ADHD do. I was quite interested in school. I loved it. All my friends were there. I had a great time. Um, I grew up in a very small town in North Wales in the UK, and it was a really close knit community. And I used to enjoy going to school, to be honest. I wasn't good at everything. Obviously, I was better at languages um, and writing, but I did always feel a sense of being different, um, being a bit strange, because I think I was always the kind of person that would want to have quite deep, meaningful conversations with people all the time. And that's not something everyone wants to do. Um,
Yep.
so I did feel a sense of separation from groups of people in school. In terms of the school work, I didn't struggle with that at all. I started to struggle at university, definitely. I think as the pressure piled on, that's when it kind of triggered off a bit more of the ADHD symptoms for me. The executive functioning. One thing that was different about my high school years, I think, was I had a lot of anger and frustration. So I would feel very frustrated very easily, which I still sometimes get. I think it's just a sense of overwhelm and having too many things in my head at once. And sometimes I just kind of um, lash out, really. My mum actually reminded me, I used to do this really strange thing when I was angry, and I used to bite down on my hand when I was quite young as
Mm,
like a way of releasing the anger and tension. I'd never hurt anyone. I wasn't the kind of person that would throw things or, be aggressive. It was more internalized. It was more aimed at myself than anything else.
yeah.
So I would think to myself, why am I doing this? Why am I acting like this? And then I would just get really angry with myself. And I remember a few times people at school or my mum would just go, oh my God, why are you acting like this? You're being really strange. Or if I ever got called weird or strange, that would set me off. I would feel so angry and so hurt because to me, the word weird is such a trigger to me that if I'm weird, that somehow I'm, you know, not accepted.
Yeah, obviously. Yeah.
Um, and just like, yeah, a sense of, you're defective.
Hmm.
And that's quite a profound thing to think when you're in your formative years.
Wow. Yeah, it's funny. First of all, I feel like the majority of the women I speak to um did well in school. I think that it's actually the minority of women who really struggled in school because I think women just have, girls or anyone who was socialized as a girl growing up, like they have I think that a lot of the issues are much more of that kind of internalized daydreaming and the people pleasing that kind of starts to snowball throughout life, and then you become this just you become incredibly anxious as a result because it's all of that like internalized um issues. So I think you were kind of talking about how strangely you did well in school, and I think that seems to me like that's actually much more the norm. um, but it was interesting because like I've spoken to a lot of women about anger from overstimulation, right? I think that's really like a misnomer that like that, especially when you talk about autism, when you talk about when with neurodiverse people, there's sort of this stereotype that like when you get overstimulated that you kind of you cower, or you think of the like stereotype of like the autistic child who has like the headphones and is kind of like hiding. But I think a lot of the time with overstimulation we get really really angry, and so I've like talked to a lot of women about it, especially mothers, when we talk about like the rage that we have toward children, and that we have a lot of difficulty with emotional regulation when we get overstimulated from the noise of children, babies and crying and everything else. And so I've always talked about it in that regard, but I've never really thought about like that kind of overstimulation leading to anger and self-harm in a kid. But like when you talk about it, it makes perfect sense. Like that's, yeah, absolutely. That would be a way to calm yourself, right? Is that kind of that anger and that rage to then want to kind of localize the pain in a way would be that's interesting. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody about rage in children, but I mean um my acting out as a kid always was like talking back to my teacher and being like really I always ended up in the principal's office for just being, the teacher would tell me I had to do something and I'd be like, no, I don't want to, like those were the moments where I acted out. So anyway, I'm just like processing all of this as I go. But that's really interesting. And so then how did you get into craft beer? To
Oh yeah,
totally
okay.
jump.
I know. Well, I moved to Australia in 2015, and I was doing farm work for quite a while of that sort of first year that I was here, which we have to do in order to get an extra year on our visa.
You have to do
Um,
farm work?
yeah, we have to work on like Australian
Really?
farms. Yeah.
That's so idyllic. Oh, that's cool. I had no
No,
idea.
it's not.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I just like that's kind of smart actually for the country to just be like, if you want to live here
Absolutely.
longer, you've got to do manual labor.
Well, that's it. And it was very manual labor, but that's where you form the strongest sort of friendships was
Hmm.
because you're, doing back-breaking work in 45-degree Celsius
You're
heat.
all literally in the shit together.
Yeah. So that was great. But then I moved to Sydney after I sort of did my farm work, moved around a little bit. 2016, I moved to Sydney, and I sort of moved around a few pubs and things because that's kind of the easiest work to get into when you're not sure how to make money. In Australia, you earn quite good money doing hospitality, so anything in restaurants, pubs, bars, that sort of thing. Um, and then me and my friend just decided to go on, so ridiculously British, go on a pub crawl um, to find me a new job in a pub. So me and my friend Adam were like, okay, I need a new job. So let's go and drink some beer at these pubs that I might want to work at and hand my resume in. And so that's how I got a job at a really sort of um, a pub that everyone loves in the area I live in called the Courthouse. And so we call it the Courty for short. And I started working there for about a year and a half. Fantastic establishment that's very open-minded, welcoming. It's, you know, the suburb I live in is very sort of left-wing. It's very progressive, and all sorts of different people live here. It's fantastic. Because not all of Australia is like that. Some of it's very rural, should I say. But it was fantastic, and that was my first taster of sort of really crafty local beers from Sydney, and it just kind of went from there, really. So I worked at a pub that had craft beer on tap, and then one of my friends said to me, "We're opening a brewery. Like, I'm a rep, as in he sells the beers to pubs. I'm a rep for this brewery. Do you want to come and work at our new tap house?" And I said, "Yeah, that would be fantastic." So then I kind of dipped my toes into working in an actual brewery, not too far from where I live. And I started hosting tastings. I was a supervisor there, so that was fantastic. And then I ended up getting a job at my current employer called Beer Cartel, which is essentially, we've got a bottle shop, which is, I guess you'd call it a liquor store or something. It's just, we sell beer there.
Yeah.
And that's all we sell. We don't sell spirits or wine. It's very focused on beer. And then we have a warehouse as well where we send online orders. So in the pandemic, that's been great because people order a lot of beer online. So we could keep our job. That was fantastic. So essentially, I've been working in the industry for about 4 years now in various capacities. I've done some podcasts as well related to beer, and I love it. I love this industry, but I did notice that it's very obviously male dominated, and a lot's got to change in terms of how women are treated and approached in this industry. There's so many examples I could, go into with how we are treated sometimes in terms of, oh, where's your manager? I want to ask about this or that when I'm standing right there, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
All the sort of things you can imagine. And, there's some quite dire things that have happened as well to people, assault, that kind of thing. So essentially, I just want to be an advocate, for women in the craft beer industry. We're just as valid. We know our stuff. And just because I'm not a guy doesn't mean I don't know more than you about beer.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially from that, I started writing blogs for Beer Cartel as well. And doing podcasts, and it kind of went from there in terms of writing. And then I decided, of course, on a whim, to become a freelance copywriter and journalist, because I've always loved writing, and having done languages at university, I was like, well, why don't I combine my love of this and this to create this? And I didn't have the confidence before this year to do it, to be honest, because I always thought, no, I can't do this. I don't have the skills, the confidence. And I just kind of did it. I created a website for myself, started advertising myself as a copywriter, and the work's been pretty steady ever since then. And I still work at Beer Cartel, still do their blogs and things and sell beer, but I also do my freelance copywriting as well. And that's something that's an end game for me, is essentially do that full time. But as a freelancer, you can't just go straight into that because you need to build a client base, which is essentially what I'm trying to do at the moment, is build that foundation for the future for myself. But it's been going really well. I love writing. I'm a bit of a languages nerd, to be honest, so it does make sense that I'm doing that.
See, once you actually trace everything back, it all makes sense. All these seemingly random interests and vocations all like come together, and you're like, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense why I'm here with all of these.
Absolutely. It does fall into place. You never listened to your parents or your grandparents when you were younger, but it does all fall into place when it should. Somehow, magically, it kind of just happens.
Mm-hmm.
And it's awesome. And obviously, we have something to do with that. We make things happen for ourselves as well. But if I have any advice to anyone, it would be just let things happen the way they just are naturally supposed to happen, and not put too much pressure on yourself.
Yeah. Um, yeah, I think that we have a lot of impatience. And I would say that's one of the difficulties with being an entrepreneur too, is like, I also like so often I will have these great ideas and I'll do this thing. And then I'll be like, all right, I did the thing. Why aren't 100,000 people knocking down my door to get this thing or buy this thing? Like, you just sort of assume that like everybody's going to realize how great this is right now, right? Like that there's no sense of, of growth or progress. And then, of course, when that happened, like that's like me with social media. I will post furiously on social media for like 2 weeks, and then I won't get the adequate feedback that I require for my dopamine hit. And then I'm like, this sucks, forget it. I'm not doing this anymore. And I give up. And I'm like, what did you expect? There's like nobody,
Let's
you have
just
no
go horse
followers.
riding instead.
Exactly, right?
Do something
Uh,
else.
but you're right, it is true. Like once you actually kind of take the time and to look through the hindsight, it is amazing what we can accomplish and all of like the how everything does sort of tie into each other. So on that note, what would you say you love most about your ADHD?
There's a lot of elements to ADHD that are actually really positive. I think that people do forget about. I'm I don't mind my impulsivity. It's not always a good thing, but I think it keeps things fresh and interesting. That's for sure. I love my passion for life, my passion for pretty much anything. I love food, I love music, I love my friends and my family. And when it's warm outside, when it's cold outside, I have a huge passion for pretty much everything in life. I'm always curious about things, and I have, like you said, a childlike wonder, I'd say, which probably annoys people sometimes and probably makes them feel like a bit confused. Like, who is this person? Why are they like a child? I don't understand. But a lot of my friends, love that quality about me. They think I'm really fun and I enjoy making people laugh. And I try and keep it lighthearted most of the time because I just really enjoy making people laugh, I think. And that's probably part of the ADHD, is just having that childlike quality, which is quite hard to find, I think, in a neurotypical person who's a bit more sort of tethered to reality. I like to not be in reality a lot of the time, to be honest. I'm like, well, if I want to be a famous writer, then I bloody gonna do it, and you're not gonna stop me. Or, and then I'll just go, actually no, that's ridiculous. And then I'll go, I want to be like, a professional swimmer, or not that actually, but I like the fact that I can come up with new ideas constantly. That's proved really helpful for my copywriting. So obviously, when you're writing, you have to be coming up with new ideas all the time. So that's been really good for me. And yeah, I think one of the main things is the passion I feel, and the intense emotions I feel aren't always negative. They can be excitement, happiness. Sometimes I'll feel goosebumps when I listen to a song. I don't know if everyone always feels like that, if it's always that sort of intense.
Yeah, I was trying to explain to my kids the other day what verklempt means because they'd never heard of it before. And I was like, is that a really old term? Have you heard that term, right? Verklempt? No, you have no. Okay, I think it's Yiddish, right? So it's basically like the feeling you get before you're going to cry. So I was like, there's like stages. So it's like your nose gets tingly, and then like the back of your eyes start to hurt a little bit. And I was sort of explaining how, like, whenever I listen to certain songs, I will get that feeling. It's like pre-cry, So there's like different phases before you cry, because it's like sometimes your lip will quiver. And so there was a Saturday Night Live skit in like the 90s, which is totally dating me, but there was always these Jewish women from Long Island who would talk about getting all verklempt, and they were with oh God, what was her name? Uh what's the actress from God, Streisand, Barbara Streisand. Anyway, this is a weird random tangent that you reminded me of with the singing or with the song too, right? Because I was having this moment where I was explaining to them like all of the pre-crying feelings that you get physically in your head, in your face, and your sinuses, and they were sort of looking at me like I was speaking another language, and I had that moment where I was like, everybody feels that way, right? Um, but you get that a lot with ADHD too, where you're like these things that you sort of always assumed everybody had, like goosebumps with songs, and that you're sort of like realizing like everybody feels that way, right? And then you have to come sort through each and every one of these idiosyncrasies and being like, oh, is it really only 10% of the population roughly that has these reactions and experiences these things? And it just feels like they're everywhere and I'm surrounded by it. And I've always done these things. And most of my family members do these things. And everybody I've ever loved in my life does this thing. And you're like, oh, right, that makes sense. I only like people who are interesting. Like I was like, I only like people, I'm only drawn to people who are like me, And so there's that question of like, are we really surrounded by other neurodiverse people when we are neurodiverse because we're drawn to each other?
Oh,
Except for our
absolutely.
except for my partner, my husband. When you were talking about childlike wonder too, I was thinking about like how, that's one of the things I love as well. Like, I just feel like I do have this sort of childlike energy about a lot of new things and discovering things. But then I also have this childlike relationship with money and spending. And I feel like I am not the adult in this relationship at all a lot of the times. And I'm like, I don't know what to do with that information. Like when we have those conversations where my husband is like, you do realize how a budget works, right? Like you do think about money coming in and money going out. And I'm like, no, I don't. Like, I don't think that way. Um, and again, it's like sort of feeling like where I'm not an adult a lot of the time. I have that feeling. And I didn't realize that was actually quite common. There's like a lot of us who at the end of the day have that feeling of like, I didn't get the manual. I didn't get the adult manual. I'm sorry. I don't know how you guys all figured this all out. Like, was it osmosis or what? But I didn't get it. I'm not there with you yet. Um, so yes, I'm very grateful for neurotypical partners.
I think my partner actually thinks he has ADHD, and he hasn't been formally diagnosed, but I can recognize the signs in him immediately. So it's quite funny that we kind of found each other because it's a complete chaos.
Now, did he think that, has he come to his realization through you and your awareness, or was
I
it?
think so, yes.
Yeah.
I think, like me, it was not something he thought about in too much detail. He just thought, probably. But then, he'll console me on the days where I feel like I can't function at all. And then he's actually just started studying to be a teacher. And he's having a really hard time studying. And I just said to him, I think you probably do have ADHD if you can't focus on anything. And, that extreme level of procrastination, for example, let's tidy the entire house instead of doing this one thing that we really need to do.
Yeah.
When we wouldn't ordinarily do that at all. And he's very forgetful, bless his heart. He's very forgetful. And he's one of the most amazing people I've ever met. He's so intelligent, but he just struggles with that a bit of that executive functioning as well on different ways to me though, which is probably a good thing. Because I'm not forgetful. I'm weirdly I'm late for everything, and I'm scatty as anything. And I'm if you talk to me about something, I'll probably try and talk to you about something else that I'm actually interested in, which is probably very annoying. But I do remember things, and I'm quite perceptive as well. We were having a conversation the other day about people's eye color, and I said to him, could you tell me like all your friends' eye color if I asked you? And he said no. And I said, I've known them a lot less, like a lot, not as long as you have, but I could tell you every single person I've ever met, I could tell you their eye color. So like that level of perception, I think is something to do with my ADHD, because I'm constantly checking out, my surroundings and looking at this and that and all the details. And Davey's just, it goes over his head and he doesn't sort of notice anything that's going on around him at all. But his ADHD is definitely different to mine. But that's obviously normal for men to
Mm.
have it presenting differently. But his executive functioning isn't quite as severe as mine. But the side things where he's studying, I think he's been really struggling with that. So that's something we'll definitely look into. But when you were saying, we're drawn to people that are possibly neurodivergent, I think that's definitely the case. One of my best friends is bipolar, and she's one of the most interesting people I've ever met.
Hmm.
So yeah, I agree with that.
I wonder with memory if there's there must be different types. I haven't really done much research on memory, but like, so many of us do struggle with memory, but like now that you mention it, like I have a great visual memory. So like if I've driven somewhere, I will always be able to drive there again. I will immediately, I will always remember how to get somewhere from that visual memory, and like I will remember somebody's face from anybody I've ever met my entire life, but you will tell me your name 12 times and I still won't remember it. So I'm like, there must be different types of like visual and auditory and different types of working memory that sometimes they land in different areas of our brain. Because there are so many things that, yeah, like there are so many things that I will forget. I'm terrible. I spend a lot of time setting up ways in which I can help myself remember things, like I have my reminders app on my phone that goes off all day long to remind me to do literally everything from like feed your children, take your morning meds, take your evening meds, like feed your pets, like every things that you would think that you have to do every day that eventually you would remember to do. I can't remember to do them unless I have these reminders going off. Um, but I will, I remember every horrible thing my mother-in-law has ever said to me over the last 20 years.
Oh, that's just the way it works. I think everyone would probably remember that kind of stuff you
Right.
really don't want to remember.
But that's what I mean. Like, I think there are ways in which when we start to talk about things like rejection sensitive dysphoria and like the way in which we ruminate and we will hold on to negative comments for the rest of our lives, and they will hover around us no matter what we do, like little ghosts that will follow us everywhere. So that's interesting. I didn't really think about like the we really can be very specific with memory, or even just like with language too. Like it amazes me. Language is one of those things that my brother, who is not diagnosed, but I'm convinced he also, of my two brothers, I'm convinced he also has ADHD, but he is really, really proficient at language, and he picks up languages. He speaks multiple languages. He's never had an issue with vocabulary, but I could never remember vocab. I just was like, I can understand, I will learn everything theoretically, but when it came to actually like remembering the vocab, I just never could do it. And so but then again, like there's also a lot of actors have ADHD. I'm like, how do actors remember monologues, and how do actors remember scripts? Like there's got to be all these different like corners of our brain where sometimes they work and sometimes they don't, where it comes to
100%.
memory.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's funny that you mention RSD because that's not a concept I actually knew existed until recently, and that is a symptom that I feel actually probably every day of my
Yeah.
life through one way or another. And it's obviously my brain being a bit unkind to me because I have a lot of amazing friends that are just the strongest friendships you can imagine, like they're my family. But I also have this feeling of you're different, they don't like you, they don't like you, they don't like you, constantly going in my head. It's just so strange because there's no reason for me to think that way. Um, and when I think back to any sort of rejection I've experienced, it has been blown up in my head to ridiculous proportions.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's not just a rejection from that one friendship or that one person, it's from society in my head. And it's, yeah, that's something that I definitely wanted to touch on because it's, if anyone else feels like that, you know, I understand, and it's awful. It's one of the worst parts of ADHD is that feeling of rejection because it hits you right in your core.
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely, I feel like the best way I've ever just heard it described, and I talk about this a lot with in previous interviews too, it's just piece of shit syndrome, right? Which is like, and that was kind of how my therapist really started to talk about it with me, was just that inverse relationship between accomplishment and self-esteem, right? And it almost feels like they are inversely related. Like it does feel like the more you get done in life and the more you accomplish, the worse you feel about yourself, that you're just like, yeah, but I'm a piece of shit. And so it was like that. I think that was really what struck her, which was like the overwhelming sense of that's like disregard for ourselves, which I think was a huge part of my journey when I was first diagnosed, which was just like really getting to the core of like what it's like to live your entire life feeling like you can't trust yourself, feeling like you had a certain amount of you know uh, uh what's the word I'm looking for that was always told to me in school? Potential. Okay, so it's like you had this enormous amount of potential all the time and you couldn't get there and you couldn't perform, and it was like knowing that you were bright but never feeling like you could prove it. And so it's like you've gone through your whole life with this overwhelming sense of like self disappointment, and so like dealing with that and carrying that around, it just felt like it got worse and worse no matter how much, no matter how much you accomplished in life, and no matter how like much how fun you were with your friends and how much you were, using humor and all the masking and everything else, it was like it felt like this self-esteem and the RSD would just like grow like this monster that was being fed by everything else in your life. And like that's, I think, something that, when we talk about RSD and we talk about like that level of pain, you can see it in the eyes of other people who have ADHD or have been especially diagnosed in adulthood, where it's like, yeah, like that was so, it's a huge part of it, right? It's a huge part of it is carrying around that secret, like indescribable sense of sadness and shame that it has accompanied so much of what we do in our life, that I don't think a lot of people really understand how, when we do talk about the struggles of ADHD, that's really what it is. It's so difficult to articulate. And I think, why a lot of people just sort of don't really, I think it's easy to kind of dismiss ADHD as this like hilarious disorder where you like talk about squirrels and all of that stuff. And like there's so much underlying um hurt and sadness. And I think it's also why people get really upset when there's that toxic positivity element where everyone's like, no, ADHD is a superpower, it's great, it's the most wonderful thing. And you're like, well, yeah, I see that, but I also like really really struggled for a long time, and like what am I supposed to do with that information? um yeah, I
No,
don't know.
absolutely.
I feel like I am definitely rambling in this interview quite a
Oh,
bit.
I know I ramble a lot as well, so I'm right there with
Um,
you. Don't you worry about that. But
but yeah, no,
yeah,
it's true. And so that was interesting to me because I had also never heard of, what did you call it? It was OOCD, the like
oh,
the
pure
comedy,
O.
pure OCD.
Yeah, so there's
So that's like
obsessive
there's the,
compulsive
but
and then
the
pure O.
physical, and then the mental. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, essentially, I think it probably comes a little bit hand in hand with ADHD for me, because a lot of people that have this type of OCD do have ADHD as well. Because I think obsessive thinking is definitely a thing with ADHD,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of did I do this right? Does this person like me? That's a bit obsessive, I think, and it's not anything to be ashamed of. It's just a fact. Um, so with pure OOCD, I had never heard of it either. I think it's a relatively new concept, that they're still researching, but it essentially means that I don't have physical rituals like you'd imagine flicking the light switch off and on 5 times, or everyone's going to die. It's nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's more to do with mental rituals. So trying to get rid of intrusive thoughts, by thinking about a song or just trying desperately to control my thoughts. Whereas what you should be doing is allowing thoughts to come in and out as they wish, because they don't actually mean anything a lot of the time. But with pure OOCD, you attach a huge amount of meaning to any intrusive thought, and it gets really, really distressing. If you research pure OOCD, you'll find that there's awful subcategories that people can fall into. For example, I was told by my therapist, one of her clients had felt that she was a paedophile. Those were her intrusive thoughts. And for a female, or just anyone, that is probably the worst thing you could be thinking. I'd, rather be an axe murderer than a paedophile. So those kinds of really, really distressing thoughts, ones I used to get were that I had schizophrenia, because I was so scared of losing control when I had anxiety that I convinced myself that I was actually going crazy, as it were. Of course I wasn't. It was just a feeling of losing control of my thoughts and my feelings, and how insanely high my anxiety levels were, that everything just seemed too much. And it's essentially you're trying too hard to control your thoughts, and so they keep returning, and they kind of haunt you in a way because you can't control them, and they're just very distressing sometimes. The best way to describe it for someone who doesn't have these thoughts is, have you ever been in the car and you just think to yourself, I could just jump out right now onto the road?
Yeah.
Or I'll just throw my mobile phone out onto the street, or I'll just punch this guy that's walking towards me. You don't actually do these things. No one ever does these things. They're these weird urges and impulses, and you just disregard that thought. Most people would go, that was funny, that was a bit weird, or just won't even think about it. But for us, it's a bit more intense than that, and you attach meaning to those thoughts, and it can really, really distress you on a daily basis if you don't get a handle on it, because you kind of see that as reality. I had a thought that I wanted to, kick that dog, so that means I'm a terrible person. Do I want to kick that dog? Oh my goodness me, this, that, and the other. So it's essentially attached to anxiety, and it just your brain kind of latches onto these really negative thoughts and snowballs them to the point where you just think you're the worst person in the world.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like I need to do a lot more research into intrusive thoughts. My 10-year-old has been asking me about it recently, and we've had some interesting conversations about it. And in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, time to get him a therapist. But it is really interesting, and I think there's been, I think it is a big part of. I don't know if it's just a part of anxiety and we just are a more anxious society, or if it has something to do with neurodivergence. But it is something I think a lot of us experience and do attach meaning to. Am I a terrible person? What does this say about me? And that kind of thing. Now, if you could rename ADHD, have you thought about something you would rename it? Because it's such a problematic acronym for so many of us. It makes no sense. It has not really does not reflect our experience at all.
For me, I'd like to take the negative connotation away from it, and I'd like to not think of it as a disorder. Yes, we suffer in some ways, but I don't like to think of it as a disorder. I like to think of it as, you have these people and you have those people, and we think this way and you think that way. An alternative thinker, I don't know, anything that's, I could describe our brains as somewhat of like a seesaw, isn't it? There's this amazing part, and then there's also this horrible part. It's hard to kind of describe to someone that's never experienced those symptoms before, because it has such amazing qualities and also really heartbreaking qualities as well. So I'm not sure what we could rename it as, but I don't like the thought of it being something that just makes everyone suffer or make them a bit hyperactive, or because that's just not an accurate description at all.
Yeah. We'll just call it the seesaw contingent.
Yeah. I think that
That's
makes sense.
wonderful. So I'm this hour has flown by. How did you find the podcast? I'm curious.
Because I have ADHD and I research everything all the time. So I went onto my Spotify and I just typed in women with ADHD and guess who popped up?
That I love to hear that because that's like that's exactly what I did when I was joining every single Facebook group and following every single Instagram and on Twitter all the time and TikTok, and I did the exact same thing. I typed in women ADHD and found some podcasts and listened to them, and then when I decided to start one, I was like, no brainer, this is what I'm going to call it, because that's exactly what I would have searched for, and it wasn't taken. That was the other thing. I was like, I could have, I think there was some part of me that should have called it some sort of cutesy name about, Ritalin or Adderall, but and I was like, no, this is really, you just need to go with the search engine. So
Yeah,
as a
absolutely.
copywriter, you should understand SEO, right? Like
100%. You did the right thing. You did the right
um
thing.
well, that's awesome. I'm so glad you found it and reached out to me. It's been really fascinating hearing all of the interesting connections, and I'm in total body buzz right now.
Yeah, me too. I'm always, but I get like that so easily. Even if I write a good piece of writing, I'll start feeling like I just need to do a marathon or something to get rid of the positive, like all
Right?
that energy.
Right? Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
even yeah, and even when you were talking about like women and in the beer industry, which I can't even imagine. Like, do you ever feel like sometimes I feel like maybe I have ADHD or maybe I'm just a feminist who's living in a misogynist society. Like, because I have so much anger about fucking everything that has to do with men.
Oh,
Sometimes,
I
I mean,
know. I feel the same way.
and then so part of me is like, maybe that's all. Maybe this is just the trauma of being a woman living in this society right now, and maybe that's all this is. I don't know.
ADHD doesn't exist. It's actually just anger at men. That's all it is.
That's going to be my next podcast. That's awesome. So now I guess I you don't know when you'll be able to go home, right? If you ever do you ever travel back and visit?
I
No.
do. I have done twice now. I didn't see my family for 3 years, the first 3 years I was here, which is a long time to go, but I was having a great time. And it's I couldn't be any further away from home. The only other place I could be that's further away is New Zealand. Like I'm so far away, it's not even funny. It takes me
Yeah.
about 30 hours to get home. So and it is expensive, but yes, as soon as I can go home, I will, because I'm very close to my family and they understand how much of a weirdo I am. So that's nice.
Now, has anybody in your family come to their ADHD diagnosis through you, or anyone else you think is on their own journey? Is your mom wondering if she has it?
My mum does think she has it. My grandmother absolutely has it. Oh my goodness. I feel like all three of us have it, but I'm the lucky one that's actually sort of researched into it and things. I've always been very, I'm a very analytical person. I analyze everything, a lot of my own behavior. So I've always been very curious about why, I wonder why I'm acting like that, or I wonder if there's a name for this, like feeling that I have. Whereas my mum and my grandmother very much, oh, okay, like they're a bit more surprised when I say, you know, this, you might be acting like this because of this. I think you have ADHD, mum. And then she'll go, oh yeah, probably, and then that'll be the end of it. So
That's
yeah.
I think I like to joke about that where other people are like, "What's your favorite color?" My favorite color is green, whereas we're like, "Why do I like green? What does it say about me that I like green? What is it? What is it going to mean? What even is green?"
Existential crisis.
Right? About everything. Awesome. Well, this was great. Thank you so much, Holly. I love your website, by the way. You've got so many great photos and the
Thank you.
even your name, it's such a nice font. Did you do that yourself?
No, I actually hired a friend of mine who's a graphic designer. She's amazing, Bianca Jarvis, creative,
Oh,
and she I just said, I want it to be colorful and retro because a lot of copywriters, in Sydney at least, tend to be quite corporate. Their websites are very, I'll get this done and that done, and you can trust me and I'm reliable. Whereas I just kind of thought, okay, I just want to be who I am. I don't want to come across as this person who's going to be very corporate. And I'm just a good writer. I like writing. I'm good at it. And if you work with me, I'm very personable and fun, and that's pretty much it.
No, you definitely get that energy from your website, hollyjslater.com. I'll put it in the show notes for anyone who wants to look it up, poke around, and maybe even work with you. But yeah, your energy is definitely infectious on that website. It really leaps off the page. And so yeah, it sounds like you've found found a great job for your personality.
Absolutely. I love writing. It's, yeah, definitely part of who I am. Just took me a little while to get there.
Yeah, I spent 20 years as a journalist and I loved writing and I loved blogging. And now I'm just like, I can't, I feel like I've lost it. I'm like, can we just talk? Like, even texting, I'm just like, I can't, when people are like, how are you? I'm like, I can't, I can't text you a reply to how are you? Are you kidding me? I'm just like, can we just talk? Can you just like, let's just make a phone date or something? And so I feel like that's happened a lot as I get older now. I'm a cautionary tale to you because I'm 46, so I'm like, careful. In my old age, I sort of feel like I've lost the ability to like put my thoughts into the written word.
I actually do understand that sometimes you can get these mental blocks a little bit more than you used to. I can't actually even read a book anymore, which is sad.
Oh, yes, I gave that up too. I've embraced the audiobook. And it's which is amazing to me because I will listen to like 3 books a week. But I can't remember the last time because I listen to them I go for when I'm walking my dog, when I'm doing it, folding laundry, at night when my kids are watching TV, I'm just like listening to a book, pretending like zoning out. Um, but yeah, I've been reading the same book for like since last February, basically.
Wow. Must
So
be
yeah,
bloody good.
no, it's just really taking me that long.
Oh, an
Like the
actual book as
actual
opposed to audio.
yeah, the actual book I've been
Gotcha.
reading for like a year and a half. It's been the same book that's been sitting on my bedside table.
I
Um,
have a book on my bedside table as well, and I haven't read it. God's sake, Holly. Oh well.
Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you again. It was lovely chatting with you and getting to know you. And yeah,
Yeah, you too. Absolutely.